Hello, everybody. Chris Neidl here. Thanks for joining this last episode of This Is CDR for 2024. Happy to close it out, and we'll be resuming again in the first week of January. More on that program later in the show. But please, you could all join us. I'm very excited, actually, for this latest installment of This Is CDR. We have Hannes Junginger from Carbonfuture, which is an organization that I'm a big fan of and have been following and interacting with since the early days. True fact, we actually had a German version of This Is CDR called Das Is CDR that we did a short run of last year, and Hannes was our first guest on that. So happy to be talking to him today in my native tongue. So the format will be a little bit different today than previously or normally, which is great. Normally there's a presentation from our guest. Today we're going to maybe have a little mini presentation from Hannes, but we're really going to get right into a conversation and sort of talk through Carbonfuture in a conversation in lieu of a presentation. As always, we encourage folks to pop their questions into the chat, and we'll pull that right into our conversation as we go. But before I bring Hannes on stage, I want to just give a little bit of background for those of you who are new to This Is CDR and to Open Air. This is our weekly kind of flagship webinar that we try to do every Tuesday at 12 Eastern. We are now, I think, Hannes, I think you are our 105th guest. And we've interviewed all sorts of CDR innovators and entrepreneurs and subject experts, really all with the goal of trying to give our viewers a sense of the living, breathing nature of this sector and the people who are behind it and driving it in all its glory, evolving glory. And so this is every Tuesday. And again, for those of you who aren't familiar with Open Air is an all-volunteer action network that exists to advance carbon dioxide removal in many different ways through our membership. We are a all virtual community, all volunteer, no staff, just a bunch of people who care about CDR in different parts of the world working on stuff. And our primary home is our Discord server, which is kind of like Slack. I'll pop a link in that in a second if you want to join it. And that's where we communicate and scheme and get things done. And the areas that Open Air works in, you can kind of divide in broadly into four what we call domains. And this, changes over time, but primarily our activities concern advocacy. We do an enormous amount of direct policy advocacy, particularly at the state and municipal level, but also some national. So our members actually get together, come up with policy, often legislative ideas where they are, and come up with ways to get it introduced and then fight for its passage. We've got a lot of stuff coming up in the works in 2025 for that. We also have a really fun and active maker community, which we consider our sort of R&D domain. So we have folks that are working on open source and citizen science projects, some really cool ones that I've talked about before in the beginning of the show. Lots of education initiatives, of which certainly This Is CDR is one, but we have other things like CDR AI, which we've talked about, which is our LLM sort of ChatGPT for CDR only that we created that is getting a lot of use, which is makes me happy. And then we also do in different ways support enterprises. So that might be folks that come together that want to sort of think through a novel business model idea, or more often directly trying to support the actual activities of an enterprise. And so we have a few different projects, some of which I have summarized on this call before. I'm very excited. Our first guest in January will actually be one of those projects called the Naka Valley Biochar Project, which is a really amazing, probably one of the coolest things I've ever worked on. It's a refugee-led biochar enterprise in Uganda, at the oldest refugee settlement in Africa that's been 2 years in the making and now is off and running. Hannes, I'll talk to you about that as well. Would love to get your thoughts, but they'll be our first guest in the new year. So without any further ado, let me go ahead and move into, I'm very pleased to welcome Hannes Junginger to the stage right now. Let me go ahead and go into this mode. Who is the founder and CEO of Carbonfuture, which is just an awesome company that really kind of in overlapping ways is filling a lot of gaps, I think, in the carbon removal value chain. Hannes, it's a pleasure to see you. How you doing, my friend?
Wonderful, thanks. It's a pleasure and an honor to be presenting here tonight and have a conversation with you, or today for those of you who are listening in from the US. So doing great.
And Hans, where are you right now? You're in Freiburg, is that right? Normally,
Freiburg, southwest Germany. Yes, call it a CDR, suburb of Zurich. So for those who don't know it,
but one with a very storied history in climate tech, particularly solar. For those who don't know the history, that was sort of a hotbed of really kind of the solar revolution in Germany that led to the feed-in tariff, and so there's a lot there. I'd imagine culturally that is
it's
beneficial
true.
what you're doing.
Yeah, and it's also like carbon removal as a Carbonfuture as a carbon removal startup has, in a way, its roots in the solar industry. So those people who inspired me, and maybe we come to that, come from the renewable energy tech space and ventured into carbon removal, and then needed a financial person to join them. So maybe
We should talk about that. I had the same
topic for later.
Yeah, I come from solar, and much of my instincts and ideas around CDR were very much shaped by my 15 years in renewables, particularly in solar. So maybe we can get into that. But let's go ahead and get started. I think a lot of our viewers here will certainly be familiar with Carbonfuture, given the scope of activities and level of activity that the company is engaged in. But let's go ahead and start simple and summarize for us what Carbonfuture is and what you're working on. And I can bring up
maybe we can start with my mini presentation. Couple of very few slides I put together for those of you who are not familiar with Carbonfuture. So our tagline, carbon removal you can trust. So everything we are building for is trust in the carbon removal space. How can we bring trust into these activities, and with that make them financeable and thereby scalable. So first slide, a bit of an overview, some KPIs, how we present ourselves to new partners and to investors and the ecosystem. So we are a leader in digital solutions for durable carbon removals. That is our niche, so to say, the durable space, very much focused on industrial value chains here. We facilitate the issuance of these high quality carbon removal credits, and for the buying side, we provide diversified and de-risk removal portfolios. With our approach, we are a couple of years in the market already. So one of the early movers here, we used to have a market share of 40% of delivered carbon removal credits in 2023. I think it went down a bit in 24, but quite significant, which is also a sign of the early market, of course. So if you go into the market and take 40% of market share, that is in a way great, but also in a way a huge challenge for all of us in the industry to make this market big. We have a couple of nice names on the purchasing side, such as Microsoft, the leading buyer in the space, but also a couple of others. And I briefly want to highlight a couple of partnerships because that's very relevant for us. It's, of course, not all of them, but most lately, SIX, the Swiss exchange, joined our shareholder group, and so we are proud to have them not only as a shareholder but also a strategic partner to build out the ecosystem. It shows very much that we are a tech company that's building solutions to bridge carbon removal to the financial market, so to say. And we are very glad that we could convince SIX here to join us. We are also a commercial startup, so we are looking at our making business, right? It's not a not-for-profit organization, so we are also looking at a sustainable business model and growth. So what are we actually doing? I said it before, digital trust infrastructure for carbon markets, specifically carbon removal markets. We're connecting suppliers and buyers all the way through the carbon removal journey. So on the supplying side, we start quite early on working with the projects with our carbon removal supplier services, sometimes really at project inception, helping them navigate the landscape, navigate certification journey. Of course, due diligence is key to our activities. And then also the kind of the onboarding on our digital solution starts here. And when the projects come closer to operations, it's kind of the core of what we are doing. We're tracking, say, carbon removal tracking, but basically we're tracking the activity from the capture site and the capture processes all the way through transport, sometimes transformations to the storage side, gather quantification data and contractual data, hand this package over to third-party verifiers under independent standards, and with this process issue certificates or credits or carbon removal units and bring them to the market. And we also manage these certificates and the respective purchase agreements and provide digital infrastructure to kind of move these credits between suppliers and buyers. So to say, in that sense, we are covering a quite long value chain from supplier to buyer, and probably a bit atypical in that space, because sometimes we see a split of these two different services, like gathering data on the project level, like operating sensors and focusing on quantification data, and then the marketing activity and the commercial activity on the marketplace side. But we have a bit of different approach because we are focusing kind of on the fulfilling all steps along a protocol, and that covers like the quantification and the contractual data on the supply side, and then also like what happens with this data after issuance. And then the advantage is then you have as a buyer, or as a in particular also as someone who audits and reviews if these activities have really happened, if the credits have retired, and what's behind the retired credits. Kind of you have all the stuff on one platform, and so to say the look through from the retired credit to like where the carbon rests in peace, so to say. So that's the approach to provide a digital.
So in the kind of the nomenclature of CDR today, there's all kinds of entities that are verifiers and certifiers and registries and marketplaces and marketers, and it seems like you've taken some pieces of each of those and kind of vertically integrated them into one unit. Is that fair to say? How do you what nouns do you use besides platform to describe that full scope that Carbonfuture is taking on?
So I mean, in the lingo that we use for inside the bubble, it's kind of an MRV platform, monitoring, reporting, and verification platform. And in a way, we go a bit further downstream, because we also report on like, did you fulfill your contract also to the buyer, so to say? They could also include that in the reporting space. But we actually we go beyond, because we provide a lot of services, right, in market infrastructure services, so to say. And if you want to distinguish it from verification bodies or standards, then those guys and ladies are like making rules and controlling rules, like those who make the rules of the game, and the referees who control if it's played fairly. And we are providing like the soccer fields, the balls, the like all the services around it to make it easy and yeah, efficient and cost efficient and quality ensured what the players do, right? So it's kind of an end-to-end service for suppliers. That's how we look at our services. Let me briefly show my last slide, because that shows gives a bit of a insight. It is actually a quite an old slide. It's I still like it a lot, but it's our old design. So bear with me here. So we sometimes say we don't trade what we don't track, right? So, and what does that mean? When you look from the right side, we have a carbon removal credit on our platform, and this connects like upstream to like, okay, somewhere in the case of biochar, because that's was our first pathway we implemented. So that's kind of the old slide where we showed the case of biochar. And this is the simplest and the most simple chain of custody we can imagine, right? And of course we can also cover more complex chains, which are very relevant in industrial applications. But if you look here, you have bought a carbon removal credit, you might have retired it. Now, where does it come from? It's linked to the actual application of biochar. Here, in this case, it's in a concrete application. The material was delivered from somewhere. With a truck. It was in a packaging unit. It's coming from a facility, and there is sustainable biomass as a feedstock, and like our tracking system covers the whole look through, and this is kind of the example here. But we of course can do that also for liquid CO2 from bioenergy, carbon capture and storage, for example, or direct air capture. You could even think of like tracking rock dust, and which has no carbon included, right? But is a kind of a proxy for future carbon removal activities to the fields and all that kind of stuff. So that's basically what the platform can cover, all the way from the activity to the credit. So let me pause here with the presentation, and we can now tackle all the questions.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm pulling in my partner in crime, Tank Chen, the most hardworking man in carbon dioxide removal, who is my co-host here and will be part of the conversation. Hey, Tank, how you doing?
Good. How are you doing, Chris, on this?
Great. So yeah, there's a lot to kind of talk to there, because I think the way you've structured this is so indicative of the critical needs of an early stage sector in particular, where the whole sale is inextricably bound with the verification and quality tracking. And rather than having those segmented, you've integrated them. So there's a lot of questions to sort of ask about the moving parts of how that all works and how you interface with clients. But before I do that, I want to ask the question that we always ask at This Is CDR, is to learn a little bit more about you. You gave us a little hint that you came into this from the renewable space, and you're not alone. A lot of CDR people are veterans of other areas of climate tech and renewable energy. But if you could just tell us a little bit about what your journey into CDR, and specifically that which led to the beginning of Carbonfuture as an idea and a reality.
So maybe to correct, it was more the godfather of Carbonfuture that came from the renewable space. I myself came from the financial industry, so I was working, many years in the financial industry, mostly in banks and for banks. And here I was focusing. I'm a mathematician, so I did build models. I did advise banks on risk models and all that kind of stuff, and then moved into how banks could kind of help to transition the economy from brown activities to green activities. That was kind of my last activity in the banking sector, and that's already a bit of connection to carbon removal, because it's like how to make business cases out of activities that are good for the entire society, rather than for individual economic actors. So that's kind of the common ground here. How it all started was like from a friend who was in the active in the renewable space, sold his photovoltaics company, and then started to look into other climate tech solutions. Made a small investment in a carbon removal company, biochar carbon removal, realized that the business case will never work out without proper financing instruments for these activities. And then he approached me and asked me, and that was in between 2018 and 2019 winter. And back then, very little was available. And the key question was like how to distinguish durable removals and the climate service provided by durable or technical removals from emission avoidance reductions and also from like non-durable, like nature-based solutions, or sometimes we say managed carbon sinks or managed carbon pools. And that was the starting point. And that's also maybe the why we integrated or came up in the end with both sides, which I like a lot, but it has an historic reason. We started with characterizing durable carbon removals and trying to issue on that basis, like specified what does it mean, how long do you need to ensure storage. Characterized it and came up with like conventions to what it means to issue a durable credit. And we realized that without the upstream data, where we really can prove who did what with which project process and with which emissions involved, if we cannot tag that to the credit, it's basically worthless, but because you always have an incentive to do less, right? And because you can't see the CO2 you have captured and removed, you need to be super detailed on the data gathering side. And this entails not only quantification data, but also contractual data, for example, to avoid double claiming, double counting. That's the history why we kind of built that as a combined platform solution, to have this look through from the credit to the actual activity, and always to avoid adverse incentives, always under independent standards, of course.
So it sounds kind of like, from an MRV perspective, it's sort of MRV plus that obviously with MRV, as you said, there's this invisible object or thing that we're trying to track the movement of and status of. And that is about the quality of the CDR project or CDR pathway. But everything that you're doing too is what gives carbon removal a shape as a financial asset to a certain degree. So it's both a kind of a financial MRV and sort of a science MRV, for lack of a better term, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Thanks for framing it that way. And we are. Because we are both mathematicians, my co-founder and I, so we love generic stuff. And if you're honest and look at the different pathways, carbon removal pathways, there are elements that are generic, which means, okay, I capture there's a process that captures carbon. It happens at a facility. I have to do something with this carbon, be it CO2 or biocarbons or whatever. So you have you have to package it, you have to transport it, you have to store it somewhere. You need a protocol under which you issue it. You need a registry and conventions how to talk to the registry. You need contracts between the capture facility, the transport operation service, and the storage service, and all that kind of things are very much familiar to us from a financial industry perspective, right? You have contracts, you pay people, you have obligations, you have rights, and that's what we are really good at, right? When it comes to, like, for example, measuring weathering rates of basalt rock in certain soils, that is something very specific. And here we partner with companies who are specialized in that. We don't deploy soil measurement sensors, for example. So we are we are a platform to, it's very much focused on how can you issue a credit.
So you just, oh, sorry, go ahead.
No,
so you just laid a lot out there, and this might sound redundant, but just to kind of really put a point on it in terms of defining it. If we were to go up into the atmosphere and just sort of look at the sector right now and the value chain in a very sort of concise way, what are the particular gaps that Carbonfuture is aiming to fill? And what are the consequences of not filling those gaps? I think that's the thing, is that there's such an emphasis on the technology and the scientific need, but man, we are a long way from renewables and just dumping electrons onto the grid. There's so many more moving parts to it. So yeah, if you could kind of say, just sort of directly, what are the gaps that you're trying to fill, and why is it so important to fill those gaps, I think?
I mean, from a very high level perspective, I do believe that we only have a chance to scale carbon removal if we regulate it from a state perspective, or supranational, or I mean maybe also some kind of voluntary regulation works. But that always comes with rules and with actors that adhere to the rules and control functions and processes and protocols like that. And we are providing the tool to prove that you fulfill the rules and to make it easy to control them, right? So in a way, what I sometimes, my co-founder and I, we were hiking on the weekend, and we said, like, our purpose today is to prove that it's possible to have a complete data set on the carbon removal activity, and avoid these kind of ideas that everybody who does something with biochar should get a subsidy because it's good for the climate, right? And then you can't measure it precisely. You can't really assign high amounts of money, which you need to like vague promises. So and in the end, it's bridging carbon removal activities to the financial markets. You can also say to regulation, but regulation is always a bit like, it's quite European, right? You make rules and then you it's always with the stick, but you also need, I mean, the carrot is also very important. So we want to provide rules for both, right? Tools for both, right?
Yeah,
for the carrot and the stick.
Yeah, we'll talk about it a little bit later, because it's in one way, this is an evolving regulatory space with considerable differentiation, obviously, between regions on the state and multilateral level. So it'll be interesting to talk a little bit about how you sort of coexist and navigate those changes, and if there are things that will become state functions that are currently your functions, and that'll be an interesting thing to discuss. But before, just some more fundamental things, is just about the business model itself. So as you sort of alluded, it sounds like your primary customer are really the suppliers. Is that fair to say?
It's interesting point. I mean, we are so early in the industry, and also the market itself is kind of, it evolves in stages, right? And I think we will enter into a kind of pre-compliance market where the rules are clearer, and also many buyers who are sitting on the fence today have a bit more certainty, and then eventually move into the market. But today the market is still too small to say, okay, we are focusing on the suppliers, and also our business case works with the suppliers. So when you look at our business model today, we earn money when we facilitate a transaction, so to say, right? So,
yeah.
But the value we are creating lies in the quality of the issuance, right? So we have a higher quality credit because it comes with more data and more robust transparency, and this this is something the supplier comes up with, right? Based on working with us, but the beneficiary is the buyer, right? So today it still feels like a marketplace model if you want to. If you look at our revenue contribution distribution today, but going forward we will move down in the value chain, so to say, to be, and also on a thinner margin, of course, like like more on the digital service side. Make it cheap, make it efficient, automate the credit issuance.
Yeah. And it's interesting to me too, because we're at this, what you're trying to pull off there, as a policy advocate, I can say almost universally, one of the sources of hesitation is that it's incredibly complex and difficult to understand for policymakers to understand on top of their other climate obligations. And that really is a barrier. And what you're trying to do right now as a single private sector actor is show that there's this coherent, linkable chain of events that you're able to show in great detail. And I'm just wondering, I often say this with like the likes of Stripe and Microsoft, is that was kind of a precursor rehearsal to what they did that gives states confidence that they can do a public sort of version of it. And what you're describing, what you're describing is it's helpful to kind of show the reality of what this could look like in a future scenario when compliance markets around CDR. Is that something that you think about sort of explicitly?
Yeah, exactly. It's exactly what we and sometimes and now that you touch on the complexity, I like that in a way. And I mean, when you do fundraising, that was my life the last 18 months or so, like finding like investors for the next stage, or the next stages, so to say. You are trying to like simplify and make it easier to understand and very simple how your business model works. And in a way, I think we have to be careful here, because it is actually not that simple. We have on the one hand side an industry that doesn't exist yet, which needs also distribution of value creation along because otherwise it will not be cost efficient. And and with that we need to start organizing the different actors along the value chain. And this comes with, it is a really complex task, and it's, I mean, maybe some superstars in explaining can make that simple, but that's not my goal, right? I want to show that it's possible, that it works. And I'm really happy that SIX, the Swiss exchange, who invested now, kind of understood it and embarked on that journey. And what I discussed with them was like, okay, how can we look into a future asset class? How can we build a future asset class, like some commodities? And I'm a financial markets person, so I know some asset classes, but I looked, for example, a bit into the electricity market. And when you look at that, that's damn complicated. I mean, imagine to come up with such a market, right? It is, and it's not like, oh, it's as simple as something else, like take solar and make DAC, right? And scale it just like that. No, it's not like that. It has its intricacies, and it's a really heavy lift. And I don't want to oversimplify. I want to build something robust and scalable.
Very admirable and very important. Well, related to that question, just around your model here, and at least currently that, you're really serving the needs of suppliers. And Sue did have a really good question too. And I think you kind of suggested an answer already in some of your responses, but, what are your thoughts particularly on making sure you're protecting the buyer's interest? And then if you could compare yourself, potentially to an approach like isometrics or another, actor in the sort of intermediation space.
Yeah, thanks for the question. And I think we always need to, there's some fundamental elements in this question, like how can you ensure alignment of incentives, and what's needed in terms of separation of duties, so to say. And there is also there are also elements which are time specific and specific to where we are at in the development of the market. And I want to start with a fundamental thing. I believe that in order to align incentives, and that's again coming from my financial industry background, you need basically three types of actors. One is the actors that are like private sector companies for profit. They make business, right?
Yeah.
We are one of those, to make it that clear, right? We want to provide valuable services to clients and make business. Second type of actors are those who are making the rules for the game, right? Usually these are states, right? But in the voluntary carbon market, it's voluntary, it's the voluntary standards. And there's a third type of actors, which is the auditors. You have that in the financial industry as well. That's the Ernst & Youngs and the Big Fours and all these players. That's basically what we are mirroring here, and what we also know from the fundamental structures of the voluntary carbon markets. And I think it's sufficient to have these three. That's my hypothesis. Now, isometric is another animal. They are a standard, an entity that makes the rules, right? I think that's a very necessary role, but it's a quite different role as compared to what we are doing. What is similar is that we both have an interest to raise the quality bar, because otherwise, and that's the tricky thing about carbon removal. It is not a normal good in the market. It's a common good. So basically, you as a buyer or a supplier, what is it what you want to buy, right? And as a buyer in the voluntary market, you want to make sure that you're not on the front page of the Sunday press. Right? You can do two things to ensure that. One is staying away from this market, which is an awful effect, right? So it prevents actors from doing climate action, and the other one is really ensuring high quality, do all the due diligence. And many actors did it very, very well, and some of those who did it in the best intention nevertheless ended on the front page of the Sunday press. So so this is a difficult one, but we are here to increase the quality bar to make this industry possible in the first place. And that's very common to what isometric does as well. So we are kind of, although we are playing against each other, they make the rules, we help others to play with the rules and optimize business cases under these rules. We both have an interest to raise the quality bar.
Yeah, Tank has a great question about looking at sort of the supplier buyer dynamic on a global scale between different regions, which I'll have him ask in a second. But just following on what you just said, do you foresee a future in which states potentially could be your client? Because I feel like there's this knowledge gap or competency gap, as I said before, is sort of a real drag on implementation. And what you're doing here, that's the kind of standards that states are going to want to have in terms of being able to track, not only in a granular way, what has happened from both on the credit side and the implementation side, and ultimately what's the impact side, where you could see scenarios where what you already offer really fills a gap that states would either have to be able to do or would have to be able to, through the standards that they create, ensure that the carbon futures of the world are called on to be able to deliver that data. So how do you look at that in an evolving regulatory market that's going to change pretty rapidly and significantly? How does that affect your business, I guess?
Yeah, I mean, we are quite active in engaging with policymakers, and we want to. So how it affects our day-to-day business is twofold. We are working on educational activities. I mean, like also now presenting here in This Is CDR, maybe someone is listening in and learns something. That is one element, but also specifically with policymakers. And the other part is, of course, we are making sure that our product, for example, the MRV tracking product, is fit for purpose for all the kinds of regulations that are emerging. And it includes like providing tools for suppliers to report under state requirements, but also pull together data like from all our suppliers and also from external data sources. That's kind of an area of our product which is not visible yet. We are always building before it's visible. It's also like a non-startup approach here, but so providing data tools and capabilities of our platform to integrate with all types of, for example, look at registries. We have voluntary market registries, we have state registries, we have UN registries, we have other supranational registries, and it's not that a carbon removal activity lives or will live in only one registry. Like it could be the removal could have happened in France. The storage could have happened in the North Sea, maybe from a Norwegian actor, and it could be in the state registries. It could be in the UN registry and the EU registry, and maybe through contribution claims. Who knows how this evolves? It could even live in a voluntary registry. So we need tools to kind of consistently have these registry talk to each other and report in a way that that the policymakers are able to enforce and implement the right rules that ultimately lead to effective climate action. Because otherwise, I mean, the private actors will optimize against the rules to make a profit. That's the nature of capitalism, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Tank, I like your first question that you had on our list there. I don't know if you want to ask it now.
Yeah. So coming back to what we were talking about earlier about aligning incentives, right? So you work with both buyers and suppliers. So I'm just curious to know what are some of the dynamic between the two and some of the misunderstanding that the buyer might have about suppliers and the supplier might have about buyers.
I mean, there are a couple of so those buyers who are already active in the market, take Swiss Re, our close friends from and Microsoft, who all did such a wonderful job to bring the market forward. And I mean, they know their stuff. They know they have a pretty good understanding of the buyer side. What is less, where there's really a gap, is those buyers who are not yet there or decided maybe not to buy, maybe postpone, and or say, okay, we wait for 10 more years and do like avoidance credits and a bit of nature-based, and then we include durable CDR. There is a big misunderstanding that this is possible, right? It's just I think these buyers are not aware of the fact that this industry will not just be switched on. I mean, it's that the need of their action is kind of not really well understood. And on the supplier side, I think there's a bit of a misunderstanding in that sense that some suppliers still think those companies, they have to buy my stuff at whatever cost whatever price I need, what I wrote in my business plan and I did convince my investors with, or what. Yeah. And the reality of budgets of the CFO lives, that's not really understood yet from many of the suppliers, right? So the need to come up with cost optimized models, and some are on really, really well on track. And I have such a respect from. I mean, these are the people who are doing the real heavy lifting. I mean, if you have a machine operating or a logistics business and you have a cost and I mean it's not that you have to pay your fuels, you have to pay your biomass feedstock, and I mean that's and then you have probably a storage site that's full, right? Your tank is full, and that's really tough. And but the misunderstanding is that the carbon removal market might be a valve that you can just like open and then let it go there and money flows in.
It's unprecedented. I mean, what we're trying to do here in such a fast period of time. And if we pull it off, it will be really interesting to see what is the reach or the knock-on effects of having pulled this off for other areas of the economy. Really, but
you know what I'm waiting for?
Yeah.
I'm waiting for, because we touched on the CFO topic, I want to see line items in balance sheets and provisions made for example, a climate neutral claim, and say some auditor comes and say, hey, you need to make you made a climate neutral claim. It will cost you like at least $50 million per annum from 2030. You need to build a provision, and then you have a line item, and then we are talking money, right? That's the thing. Things I want to see.
I agree with you completely. It's got to get that embedded into the financial workings of companies for sure. I just want to also say I love, based on everything you've discussed so far, you use the term trust infrastructure to describe what Carbonfuture offers. And I think you've described that quite well. And it also really speaks to what is the key limitation and constraint we really have. It really is around this trust of these abstract flows of things. And to make that visible and bankable is of dire need. And so you're really taking that head on, I think, with Carbonfuture, which is exciting. We have a couple of other just sort of technical questions from my buddy Heather here. And this kind of also talks to the what's under the hood of your process. There's a lot of, you're a mathematician with a PhD. There's a lot of computation that is sort of going on here. And so she kind of gets into that. She's another quant herself. But is there a platform that includes automation of the calculations and a set template for reactive transport template so that everyone is standardized for those things? Does that question make sense?
Yeah. I mean, we have, how shall I describe it? What we do is kind of, we track the activity of carbon removal along along the chain of custody, or along the value chain. And at each node of these tracking graphs, so to say, and it does not need to be just a linear graph. It could be, it's a directed graph. It could look like a tree, but it could also go together again. So you can, for example, if you mix CO2 in the tank, right, you fill it in a tank, then the graph goes together again. And at each node of the graph, we can attach calculations based on the methodologies. And sometimes some elements, for example, transport, quite easy. So we have transport legs between the nodes. And here, if you say, okay, that's a truck in Germany, for example, or a ship somewhere, then you have the factors that the standard factors behind, so we can provide these calculations. But if it's more complex, then we attach the LCA specific for that facility, or for that, we call it operating record. So the facility in a specific configuration in a specific time span, and then for each activity we have a factor-based calculation then. But the very specific stuff, and I mentioned that also, for example, with the sensors before, that is then outside of our platform as an input parameter. Makes sense?
Yeah, I mean, to me, I am not a mathematician with a PhD. I will just warn you of that, but it did the trick for me. I have just two more specific questions just about where you are as a business. I know you've had some pretty big developments. So we'd like to talk through this. I'm going to let Tank ask the last question, which is really about your sort of forward look of what we're looking at over the next period of time, which is quite opaque given the dynamism of this sector and some big unknowns that are outside of the sector's control on the policy side. But just a couple of things I'd love to have you elaborate on, just as sort of an indicator of your robust health as a company. I know you recently announced your Series A funding, and I'm just curious, what was that process like? You have a complicated business here, and to be able to sell that to investors is a far cry from what a DAC company or a supplier might. And was there anything about that process that kind of surprised you?
Yeah, I mean, there are couple of elements, but I keep it short and say what really positively surprised me. We could choose in the end between funding options, and one was a wonderful VC company, and they went so deep into our vision and business model and why this, in their view, might be a sustainable and a winning model. And then the Swiss exchange, basically with this very similar hypothesis, basically saying, hey, we are building for a huge future market where the financial industry and financial infrastructure player in particular, as an exchange business, will have a role to play. And they kind of both were convinced by like our first principles build up, right, from really this fundamental kind of enterprise software approach we were building, and I was really surprised how thoughtful they evaluated their investment hypothesis, both, right? And on the flip side, of course, it was super difficult with like hundreds of VCs who were looking at a more cookie cutter boilerplate thing, which it's also totally fine, right? I'm super thankful for the early VCs who helped us on this way. But really now, and it's really now shifting for me a lot into midterm fundamental value creation, what we are doing now with a more strategic partner. So that's really a shift also in the company strategy, rather from like, okay, you have 12 months, 18 months runway. How do you calibrate your growth curves and run, and don't start too late to do Series B fundraising. And it's really.
I could definitely see some of the VCs that are already invested in CDR suppliers would be a step ahead in understanding the value of what you offer, because some of the gaps that their companies are dealing with are, they have implications obviously for the returns they're going to get. And we obviously have more and more investors in the supplier side. You mentioned a couple of times, but I know this was really significant about your recent partnership with an organization like Six. And you talked a little bit about that, but I was wondering if give us a little bit more about how significant that is in terms of how it helps accomplish, Carbonfuture's mission and really better support CDR suppliers and buyers. And then I'll hand it off to Hank.
Yeah, maybe also here briefly that they are on various levels. So fundamentally, we are operating independently as a business. So they are minority investors and they're backing us as a kind of minority shareholder. But of course, the trust they put in us also reflects on our brand and our like the willingness, so to say, of more traditional companies that are looking at that and say, okay, a conservative institution like a Swiss exchange is putting trust into that. So maybe there is kind of a valid foundation, and that helps a lot. But on the fundamental side, like when we build towards an asset class, we of course like can check at against the requirements and the stakeholders the Six is talking to. Like Six is owned by 120 banks, so they sit on the board of Six and decide on investing in us as a company, and they are also close to regulators, so we have a closer tie to the regulated markets. And it helps us on the buyer side, so the suppliers benefit short term on our improved sales capabilities, and with that, I think just more significant in the market and have more trust from the whole ecosystem. That's the
Yeah.
short-term benefit.
Well, we have to talk, Hannes, about some other stuff that we've side-channeled about around particular policy initiatives, and now I'm even more convinced that your perspective and direct involvement, Carbonfuture, will fill some gaps in our own advocacy. But let me hand off to Tank for the final question.
Yeah, so this is the part where I ask you to take out your crystal ball and maybe tell us what do you think? What's in it for carbon removal in the next years and decade, and another one is on more of your insider lens on what is one area in carbon removal that you think people aren't talking enough about.
Okay, so on the outlook, I am slightly optimistic for 25. I think we will. 24 was a tough year for many, and I think we will see the effects in early 25. So companies struggling. I think it will stay a bit tough, but I see also buyers on the fence that are moving. So I'm slightly optimistic here. Also very curious to see how the political shifts in many countries we are working in are affecting carbon removal. I'm hopeful for carbon removal that we can navigate it and will sustain as an industry and build the foundation. And this is kind of the midterm. I think 29, 28, that will be the real turning point towards regulated markets. I believe in 2031 it will be included in the EU ETS, and that's what we are building for. And the other thing, what we are looking too little, I think there is one area where I have a lot of hope, because I'm really concerned about the costs of carbon removal and the fantasies that are by nature also portrayed from VC-backed startups. I don't buy into the cost reduction curves, and that has two angles. One is I really hope for ocean-based solutions, very smart solutions where it's integrated with other, like seawater desalination plants, for example. Mm-hmm. I think this is something, although it's super tricky, open system regulation is really a wide open field, so really tricky, but from a technical and cost perspective, something to look into. And the other thing is really the interplay between the energy transition and CDR scale up. It's looked at too little. Absolutely. You can't think it distinct, right? It's not like we have to reduce emissions and that's energy transition and other defossilization, and then there comes CDR. It's so intertwined. So yeah,
I completely agree with you on both of those fronts. Well, Hans, this was really wow. I could ask you a zillion more questions right now, which means that I will be emailing you later this week. I would like to really pick your brain, but huge kudos to you for taking on this very thorny, very complicated, but incredibly essential pieces of the value chain in one business. And we're rooting for you, and I'm optimistic about your future as well. So thanks so much, Hannes, for joining us, and we will definitely be talking again very soon. Really,
thanks for having me, and thanks for the kind words. It means a lot to me, and I see they come from they're rooted in an honest and deep-hearted appreciation of, like, not only my work but like what is being done in the carbon removal industry. And thanks also for your wonderful work.
Thank you so much, Hannes. Really appreciate it. So with that, again, as I mentioned at the beginning, this is the last episode of this season. We've had a great run over the last several weeks, and we have Tank, I think I already dropped our Luma there. I'll be adding several of the book shows starting again November after the holiday. We have a great pipeline of guests. I'm excited. We'll be kicking off with the Naka Valley Biochar project, which is a project that's native to open air. And what's exciting about it is that we're not just talking about the project, but we're going to start selling credits. And that is an offer that our audience and open air community and others can engage in. And that will be actually part of the program. You'll get to meet Marius Iragi, who's the leader of that in the Naka Valley Biochar or Naka Valley settlement. And then we have a lot of other stuff from urban biochar programs. We're gonna have a couple cities on talking about how they're doing biochar on a municipal level. We have biomass burial. We got a whole bunch of things coming up, which is a reflection of the health and diversity of the CDR sector itself. So please stay tuned for that. Take a look at our Luma, and everybody have a safe and happy and healthy holiday. And with that, I'll sign off. Thanks, everybody.